Okay, good morning everybody. It's 10:30 and time to resume this inquiry. The usual reminders, mobile phones, laptops and smartwatches switched off or to silent please, which reminds me I need to do mine. Apologies. Right, good. No fire alarm test due today, so if it does sound, the fire exit is out the way we came in. Yesterday we heard from Councillor Walton, the Keep B Lane Rural Group, and I also heard the Council's evidence on master planning from Dr. Price. So this morning I will hear the Council's evidence on viability from Mr. Lloyd, which will probably take us to lunchtime. I should have checked yesterday, are both air quality witnesses available this afternoon, or is that why they're timetabled for tomorrow?
There's certainly not. My chap certainly isn't available this afternoon, but
Okay.
my own friend and myself have just been talking about whether we can find a more sensible slot for air quality rather than,
Okay.
my own friend's very good idea, rather than coming along tomorrow morning for what might be an incredibly short session.
Indeed, yeah.
And so we were, sorry, I'll let as it was Mr. Potter's very bright idea,
No,
actually, it was Mr. Potter to explain it.
Thank you. The first and the last, I'm sure, during the course of the inquiry. So we're not going to be long, I don't think, on the round table session.
No.
So it seemed a little disproportionate for us all to come just for that tomorrow morning. And I know that the appellant's air quality man isn't available today, so we can't tack it on the end of Mr. Lloyd's evidence. So we were looking at next week and trying to slot it in there.
Okay.
Now, the obvious point is probably at the end of the council's formal evidence and before the appellant's formal evidence. In other words, at the beginning of next Thursday.
Right. Okay.
Oh, good. You can come. Yep, okay.
And that sounds positive.
Yes, so my chap, Mr. Stoning, has just confirmed that he can be here for Thursday morning next week, so that'll be superb.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds good. Can I make another suggestion that after we've dealt with viability this morning, we come back very quickly just to have a look, and it may well be that just the point that I'm wishing to raise may be something that you can help me with without the air quality witnesses.
Great, even
But
better.
we'll just go through in a little bit because I'm not convinced I explained my concerns
Sure.
entirely clearly yesterday. So I think if we go through the documents, it might be clearer to you exactly what my key issue is.
That would be helpful.
In which case, it may not be necessary to do a roundtable session at all. But we'll come back to that later and see what everyone thinks. Right. A couple of other procedural matters. The appellant's responses to Keep B Lane Rural. Thank you very much yesterday for directing me to those appendices. Those are exactly what I'd been looking for and expecting to see in respect of flood risk and biodiversity. And I see that you've also addressed education and the city deal matters. In terms of transport and the executive summary that is contained within KBLR's transport review,
Yes.
Are those matters addressed anywhere? I know Mr. Axon in his proof has provided a section, but
He has, that's right. So we were talking about this yesterday. So first of all, can I just wind back a little bit. So are you content that you have sufficient on the other matters apart from transport vis-a-vis?
yes.
Great,
Yes, yeah,
thank you.
yeah.
So that's extremely helpful. In relation to transport, we were discussing this yesterday, and to summarise this as briefly as I can, Mr. Axon explained to me that he considered that the work that had been done by Keep B Lane Rural was, to his mind, so sort of erroneous that he didn't quite know where to start. So what I've said is I've asked him to do something similar to that which our flood risk expert did, because you'll recall that our flood risk expert starts by saying, well, this assessment to me doesn't really quite make sense, but I'm going to deal with all the points anyway. So
Yeah.
I've asked Mr. Axon to do something similar.
That would be very helpful because.
Thank you, sir. So that,
Okay, good.
and I've simply said that if we can get it in at the very, very latest, because obviously he has other things on his mind at the moment, but if we can get it in at the very, very latest on that day when we're due to do the 106 obligations and conditions, so in other words in week 3, because next week's going to be a very intense week, I think, on transport matters. If we can do better than that, of course we will, sir. But I have commissioned that work. So.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. That's appreciated. That will be helpful. Thank you. I haven't received anything from the Planning Inspectorate Case Officer regarding the written copies of the statements we heard yesterday. I don't suppose the Council have received anything at all, have you?
The third party.
Yeah,
Oh, are they? Excellent.
Have you
Good.
got some numbers for those?
it starts at CD 7.2,
10 point what?
7 to others.
Thank you.
So,
Yes.
here they are, yeah.
Yeah,
So we
CD 10.72 are opening submissions from the appellant. Well, yes, I think the third party statement starts at 10.76, Mr. Eastham, 10.77, Mr. Bow. 10.75 is the councillor.
Yeah,
Councillor
Yes.
they're all there.
Excellent.
They're all there, yes.
Yeah.
And I also now know how to spell the gentleman's surnames.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. That's appreciated. Good. Very helpful. 10, 5, 6, 7. Brilliant. And I was going to ask whether there's any other interested parties that wish to speak today, but clearly not.
Luckily, the sign at the door says third parties on a first come first served basis, just in case. We should be all right today, though.
We
I
might
think we'll
just
be
manage
okay,
to
won't
scrape
we? Yeah.
through the viability
Yep.
evidence. We can bust it
Sorry,
deep in
Mr.
though
Lloyd,
for
it's
you.
no reflection on you.
Okay. Any other procedural matters
No,
before
thanks,
we
sir.
start? No.
No, sir.
Okay. Right. Thank you. In which case, when you're ready, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Lloyd. Thank you.
Mr. Lloyd, you should have your proof of evidence, which contains some appendices. And let's just briefly introduce you to the inquiry, if we may, by reference to your proof. You turn up page 2 of your proof. I think you tell us what your role is as viability witness at paragraph 1.1.2, is that right?
Indeed.
And then some of your details and expertise given from section 1, paragraph 1.2.1 and onwards, and I think you supplement that with your CV, which is appended at appendix 1 to the proof, is that correct?
It is.
Going to take all of that as read, as indeed we're going to do so with the entirety of your proof. What I do want to do as a reference point, a starting reference point, is go to paragraph 2.1, where you set out one of the reasons for refusal, and it's that to which your evidence is relevant. And that's reason for refusal number 11, is that right?
It is.
Which refers to the absence of viability evidence in respect of necessary infrastructure to support this important housing land allocation. Just so we're clear about the scope of your evidence, is it directed at the delivery of infrastructure in association simply with the appeal sites, or the entirety of the allocation site?
It is with the allocation site, as stated in recent number 11.
Your proof then turns, by way of some context, to policy within the local plan, and in particular policy C1 that you refer to, paragraph 2.2, together with some supporting text at your 2.4, and policy A1 at 2.3. Just so we're clear about the division of labour here, insofar as there is a debate about the interpretation of local plan policy to the appeals. Is that you or is that Mr. Wood?
That's most definitely Mr. Wood.
So the question of whether or not the appeal schemes as part of the wider allocation site are expected to deliver the remaining section of the CBLR, is that for you or for Mr. Wood?
Mr. Wood.
That's nearly all my cross-examination gone.
All in the interest of efficiency.
We'll be out in 5 minutes' time.
What you do then do, and I'm looking in particular at paragraphs following on from paragraph 2.6 through over the next 2 or 3 pages to about 2.19, is review some of the matters surrounding the allocated sites promotion and then inclusion in the development plan. I think you go all the way back to sort of the early, not the early two, but the 2007, 2008 period and onwards.
I do.
The promotion of the allocation site and then its inclusion in the development plan. Just explain why, given that you've explained that interpretation of policy is for Mr. Wood, why you've included that in your proof.
For context, and for my own understanding as well, in terms of the, as stated, the reason number 11 is specifically to do with the allocation. So understanding the history and context of the allocation is essential for me to be able to provide an opinion.
Okay. Assume the council is right, and it's going to be for others to debate whether or not it is right, that the allocation site is expected to, required to deliver the remaining part of the CBLR. Assume that's right. Does your evidence then go on to estimate the likely cost of that exercise, and in particular the likely cost of putting a bridge across the West Coast Main Line?
It does. It specifically identifies through the appointment of WSP, who undertook a study with regards to different options in relation to a new bridge or improved bridge or amended bridge over the West Coast Main Line in terms of the B lane route, and they provided a series of costings as well for each of the routes and also a recommendation.
Okay, and I think we can note, can't we, that your Appendix 7 to your proof sets out that exercise undertaken by WSP in a technical note produced towards the end of July. In very broad terms, what were its conclusions with regard to the likely cost of putting a bridge across the West Coast Main Line that comprised part of a cross-borough link road?
They looked at a series of, as I commented, a series of options with regards to what would be appropriate, and for a route that allows traffic moving in both directions and also allows for public transport, as well as a combination of pedestrian, cycling and equestrian uses in terms of using the bridge. That the option that they selected for that, they identified a cost of circa £12.5 million, but they do have a series of exclusions in relation to what sits within that cost. The exclusions are yet to be determined, but they will be another substantial cost on top of the identified £12.5 million.
Okay. Now, we know that the appeal schemes are proposing up to 1,100 dwellings, and we know that the allocation site is expected to accommodate, by reference to the local plan provisions, we needn't turn them up to 1,350 dwellings.
Yes.
So there is a balance of 250 dwellings to be, in the order of 250 dwellings to be provided in accordance with the allocation on the balance of the allocated site, once you discount appeals A and B before this inquiry.
Indeed.
Have you considered the extent to which the development of 250 dwellings is likely to be able to afford the completion of the cross-borough link road, including a bridge, if the obligation falls entirely on them?
As I mentioned, the circa £12.5 million, which is the identified figure in the WSP report, does have a series of exclusions from it. If you make an assessment with regards to what those exclusions could potentially add to the cost, then we are talking about potentially, and also it is a bridge over a major rail crossing and safety context and working with Network Rail, then the cost could be substantially more than that. If that were to be borne by 18.5% of the total development area based on unit numbers, then my assessment is that would put a substantial financial strain on the remainder of the development and potentially make it unviable.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Lloyd. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. That was short and sweet.
Yes, indeed, and my questions will be short and sweet because you've done the hospital passes to Mr. Wood. No, don't blame me for that. Because give me one moment, and I've got a few questions for you, though, Mr. Lloyd. First of all, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Right, let me just try and get my bearings. So you set out reason for refusal number 11 on your page 4 of your proof. Can we just have that open in front of us, please? Paragraph 2.1. So just trying to understand it, basically. So we're told no viability evidence has been submitted, and one assumes, therefore, that the implication of that is that no viability evidence has been submitted by the appellants. That's presumably the implication of that part of the reason.
I would agree.
Yes. To enable an assessment, of whether, an assessment by whom?
By the local authority when considering the broader application, is my assumption. I was not the author of that note.
And now presumably the inspector.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So no viable evidence has been submitted by the appellants to enable an assessment by the inspector of whether necessary infrastructure can be provided. Necessary infrastructure. For that, is that really the CBLR plus crossing the West Coast main line? Is that what that means, as far as you understand it? That's what you've discussed.
It is what I've discussed with my client. Yes.
Yes. So, as far as you're concerned, it's not meant to bring in anything else. I'm not aware of there being anything else, but I'm just asking, just checking.
The necessary infrastructure also identified, as I understand it, a site for a school.
Right, but that's not. I mean, we're doing that, so.
Yes,
well, a site for a school in the appeals schemes, yeah.
I'm just trying to assess in terms of.
Yes.
I didn't author it. The necessary infrastructure could include more than just the Crossborough Link Road, but it does include the Crossborough Link Road.
But the only thing that you are drawing to the inspector's attention vis-a-vis this lack of evidence to enable an assessment by him of whether necessary infrastructure can be provided, the only thing you're drawing to his attention is the link road, including bridge over the railway line.
It is.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Can be provided to support this important housing land allocation. And thank you for your clarification earlier on. So that allocation means what it says. So it's not actually a criticism that we haven't proven, for example, that we can viably pay for whatever we're doing as part of these appeals. The criticism is that we haven't provided evidence to demonstrate that the allocation as a whole can support the cost of the road and the bridge. That's the gist of it, isn't it?
That is correct.
Yes, okay. All right. So, and as for whether there's anything in a planning policy in the local plan or anywhere else to place upon the applicants, the appellants here, an obligation to do that which it said should have been done, that's all for Mr. Wood.
It is for Mr. Wood.
Okay. So you've worked presumably on the assumption that when the reason for refusal says, as such, proposals are contrary to two policies in the local plan, you must have assumed that the local plan requires such an assessment to be done, and that's for Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you very much indeed. Well, I should be patient and wait until next week for the second part of that then. All right, so that obviously, you'll understand, as I've already indicated, I've got a few policy questions to ask, but I'll wait patiently until next week for that. Can I, with that in mind, then ask you about the evidence that you have provided to us? Now, you have referred in your oral evidence in chief to your appendix number 7, which is where we have these indicative cost estimates.
Yes.
And you very helpfully paginated your appendices, thank you. And at page 21, there's a summary in hard copy, forgive me, I don't know what it is online. It's the last page of, no, yes, it's the last page of your appendix 7. There's a summary of the indicative costs. Tell me when you're there, Mr. Lloyd.
Give me my computer's decided to play up.
Oh, it's always the way. It's a famous law beginning with an S. It always applies.
Yep.
Electronic page 22, if that helps at all.
Yep.
All right, you've got that page.
Yes.
Yes, and as you rightly pointed out, the costs at the top of the page, the indicative costs, exclude various matters, and the exclusions are set out below. So there would be other things that would need, other monies that would need to be found. And I mean, as we sit here, there's no criticism of you, of course, but you're not able to help the inspector with some indicative figure for whatever these other costs might be, so he could have a feel for the total costs that might be involved in bridging the railway line.
I haven't.
No, exactly. And I'm not criticising for that, I'm just trying to understand what we've got and what we haven't got. Now, in your oral evidence in chief, you went to the £12.5 million, which is the highest of the indicative costs, and it's the highest indicative cost for option 2 in the range they give, and it's also the highest indicative costs of all the options, isn't it?
It is.
But obviously, as you'll know from, and I don't know whether the inspector's read this appendix yet, but as readers of the appendix will know, what WSP have done is said, well, you could have a brand new bridge which accommodates everything and does it to a certain standard, etc., that's £7.5 to £12.5 million plus all these other costs. Or, for example, you could use the existing bridge for example, pedestrians and cyclists, and have a new bridge for the road, or a new bridge for the pedestrians and cyclists, and use the existing one for cars. And that's some of these other options, isn't it? Yes. And as we sit here in this room today, and this might be outside your area, but I mean, none of these options, if you like, have been chosen, so to speak, as the option that is to be pursued by for example, the borough council, who's got a policy in the plan about the link road, or anyone else.
It hasn't.
No.
These are indicative costs for different schemes.
Exactly. So frankly, one doesn't know whether, in the fullness of time, one would go for the Rolls-Royce £12.5 million plus all the other costs, or one might say, well, actually, we can make do with one of these lesser costs, one of these other options, plus all the other costs that would be added to those. We simply don't know.
That would be reasonable to say.
Yeah. Okay. Right. And so therefore, I mean, you will know that. I mean, you understand. I imagine what the appeal schemes are doing vis-a-vis the link road. Do you?
I do.
Thank you. That we're building we would build 2 lengths of it. There would be a missing link between the 2 parts of site A, and we're not, doing a new bridge over the railway line. So we're doing certain things, and we're not doing certain other things. I must admit that when I read the reason for views on the evidence, I think perhaps mistakenly assumed that the council were expecting the appellants to pay more money towards, the missing link, so to speak, in the link road and or the bridge over the railway line. But I'm not sure that's right. So is the council actually saying to the appellants, thanks very much indeed, you're doing, just give me one moment, you would build 89% of the link road, but we want you to contribute the remaining 11% and the bridge over the railway line. Is that what the council's saying or not?
The council's view, and going back to the allocation,
Yes.
is to understand how the infrastructure related to the allocation can be delivered,
Yes.
and how it can be funded.
Yes.
And from reading the reason for refusal, I am not clear on, say, the bridge costs being an example, how those elements of the allocation can be viably funded by the application that is in front of us, looking at it from the perspective of the allocation.
Yes, but that's I understand. But let's just wind back to my question, if we might, because I think potentially it's an important point. So let's just take a little bit of time to make sure we're clear on it. Is the council asking the appellants to make a contribution, an additional contribution towards the completion of the link road, including the bridge over the railway? And if so, now's the time to say how much money the council's seeking, or is it not? Or is this a wider point about the allocation rather than these applications?
It's a wider point about the allocation.
Exactly. So, thank you. And so therefore the council, just to be crystal clear on this, is not seeking to require the appellants to pay a sum of money. I mean, there is no identified sum of money, a further sum of money towards the completion of the link road.
I would respond to that by saying a proportional amount of money needs to be identified with
Right.
regards to the delivery of the different elements of what the allocation said that should be brought forward. So the applications need to make their a contribution that reflects the scale of those applications in relation to the size of the allocation.
Yes, but we're actually building a cost. It's been costed over £5 million. We're actually building 89%, just over a kilometre of the link road on our two parts of Appeal Site A. So when you say a proportionate contribution, that gets me back to my fundamental question, because you had confirmed a few moments ago, but it's your evidence, not mine, that the council isn't seeking a specified sum of money from the appellants in addition to, whatever else they're doing. So can I just be crystal clear on this? The council isn't, when you say a proportionate contribution, the council isn't asking the appellants, applying Regulation 122 of the SIL regs, which you'll be very familiar with, to make a payment into a fund of X pounds, because there is no X pounds that's been identified by the council.
That is fair to say. The position taken, and again going back to the wording of the reason for refusal, is one whereby the council wishes to understand how the allocation can be viably delivered.
Sure. Okay. Well, we're right. So, okay. I mean, so it's a quest for information, if you like, by the sounds of it. So let's just go on that little quest for a few moments. And as you rightly say in your evidence, it's just a bit of maths that even I can do. 1,100 homes that we propose, or up to 1,100 homes, is 81.5%. Let's call it 82% of the indicative 1,350 in the allocation for the wider site. But as you will know, perhaps, the appeal sites A and B together are 2/3, 67% of the overall allocation. So we're getting more density out of the land that we pro rata out of our land, so that I say our land, than a straightforward mathematical exercise, because obviously 67% of 1,350 isn't 1,100. Do you see? So thank you. So one of the things that could well happen, and bear in mind the council has no objection per se to the numbers that we propose. They're not saying your scheme's too dense, you're doing too many homes potentially on the appeal sites. So one of the things that could well happen is on the remaining 1/3 of the site, there could be more homes per hectare than a straightforward division of 1350 by the hectarage might indicate.
Indeed.
Yes.
The master plan that is produced and forms part of the pack for the planning application,
Indeed.
which covers the allocation area, would suggest that's not the case.
What, no more than 250 on the remaining. Can you show me something in the master plan that indicates that?
It's just as you say, it's a straight mathematical exercise based on the fact that the master plan identifies where the development areas will be on the allocation area, and then places a number of 1,350 against that.
Oh, I see.
And then with regards to the areas which have been identified for public open space,
Sure.
for sports provision, etc., they are included within the master plan. So looking at how to intensify density in the remainder of the site would prove to be a challenge, I think, based on...
Okay, right. I would double check that. I don't know off the top of my head whether that's right or wrong. I'm not sure it is, but don't worry. I can ask my master plan witness about that in due course. But let's roll, therefore, on the basis that the remaining 1/3 of the overall allocated site would be able to do no more than the remaining 250 off the indicative figure in the plan. Let's just run with that.
Yes.
All right. So the question which arises then in your mind's eye, if you like, is, well, could a scheme for 250 homes on the remainder of the allocation support the remaining costs for the completion of the link road? That's the basic question.
It is.
Viably or not. And let us assume that you're right, that a 250 unit scheme, if it had to bear all of those remaining costs, would find itself in difficulties. Let's just assume that's right, because that's your basic thought. What happens next? Are there not other sources of money that the council could use if it wished to do so?
I'm not in a position to answer that question.
Okay. So you haven't, for example, looked at, as you know, our estimated SIL just from the appeal applications, forget the rest of this allocation, forget anything else that's going on in South Ribble, our estimated SIL payment is £7.6 million.
As I understand, yes.
As you understand it. It's just an estimate at this stage for reasons which you'll understand. Have you taken any instructions from the council as to whether the council, if needs be, given that the requirement for a mandatory list has gone now for SIL monies, you haven't taken any instructions therefore as to whether the council in principle would be willing to spend any of the SIL funds, not just from this site but more generally, towards the completion of the link road if they really want the link road to be completed.
It's beyond my remit.
Exactly, beyond your remit. Okay.
Indeed.
Exactly. All right. So we find ourselves in this position, and let me just see if I can summarise this correctly. The council is not asking, as you've confirmed twice, for the appellants to pay any more money into a fund. It may very well be that the remainder of the master plan site, the allocated site, would not viably be able to pay. I mean, they'd probably be able to be paid for the missing link. It's only 100 metres, but it's the bridge over the railway line, which is potentially expensive bit of kit. So the remainder of the allocation may well struggle to pay for the railway bridge, if there's to be one. So Houston, we've got a problem, if you like, or South Ribble, we've got a problem. But the obvious thing to do would be to spend SIL money to make up the gap. But that's your remit has stopped with the remaining part of the allocation that struggle to pay for the railway bridge. That's where you stop.
It does.
Okay. who the heck picks up the next bit then as to whether is that Mr. Wood as well? God bless him.
It is Mr. Wood.
It is Mr. Wood. I'm so looking forward to Mr. Wood coming this week. Okay, I'll make a note of that. All right, that's all I wanted to ask you. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd, for your help. Let me just make a note that I'm going to ask Mr. Wood about the seal monies. Thank you. Thanks for your help. Those are my very few questions.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. I just checked my questions. I think everything has been covered, but just bear with me a moment. I think the only question I do have relates to the indicative cost estimates that or WHP provided.
Yes.
Presumably, are all of those options that are or have been deemed acceptable to the council in terms of what they would deliver in road function terms?
From the perspective of county highways and the requirements that they see for a fully functional cross-borough link road, which would, as I said before, which would include public transport, so buses passing, as well as pedestrians and cyclists and potentially equestrians, is that a number of the options that have been set out would not fulfill those requirements.
So it's not just that they're not optimal, it's that they wouldn't be acceptable.
From a highways perspective, yeah.
And is that all of the other options, or is that?
As I understand it, they are the options that, when in terms of the brief given to WSP, of the different ways of crossing the railway at that point. That's what they came back with.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Appreciate it. Good. Any questions?
Yes, just a reference, Mr. Lloyd, if we may. You refer to the master plan and the numbers of dwellings anticipated to be delivered within the wider allocated site. Do you have the master plan, CD 1.16? If you could turn that up, we'll just identify where we might find the 1,350 figure. It probably appears in other places as well, but internal page 32.
I think they're the same electronically, by the way.
Yes, they are on the master plan. Do you have that? So it's headed Section 8 Development Parameters.
It's whirring away, Mr. Ponton.
Oh, is it? Okay. If you tell me when it stops doing that and the document appears.
As I recall from looking at the master plan, I think in the key it also refers to the 1,350.
Yeah. Okay. Perhaps I can just lead on this.
Yes, that's fine.
Page 32, the first little subheading is land uses, and it says the master plan proposes a residential-led scheme. The master plan should aim to deliver in the region of 1,350 new homes on the site. Is that the reference that you might have had in mind?
Yes, so on the plan there is it supports it, but it
Which page are you looking at there? That's not the page I was on.
That's the actual master plan itself.
Okay.
And if you look on the left-hand side on the key against the master plan, you'll see around 1,350 high-quality new homes at an average density of 35 dwellings per hectare.
So that's on page 35 of the master plan document, where we see that. Another reference to the 1,350 figure.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your contribution. Well, we didn't even make it to lunchtime.
No, we didn't even make it to lunchtime. So perhaps you can pad out the air quality question you've got.
Yeah. Right. Well, I don't think there's any need to have a break. Let me just get my papers. Get that all out. Okay, so my question, I suppose, really stems from the first thing I did when looking at this topic was turning to the Statement of Common Ground.
Yes.
And so the Statement of Common Ground, if you have a copy
Indeed.
of that, identifies agreed matters and matters that are not agreed. So matters that are agreed are assessment method, assessment findings, damage costs calculation, mechanisms for investment, and Section 106, although I understand that's still being resolved. The only matter that's not agreed is traffic data. But when we go back and have a look at the damage cost calculation, it says that the damage cost on air quality for the development amounts to a very specific amount, which is
Yes.
252,000.
That's right. That's right.
So that figure remains the same
No, it doesn't.
regardless of...
No,
of
it doesn't, as I understand it. So,
No.
that's. I think what this is recording is it's agreed that if you use the figures that we've put forward, the cost is £252,046.
Okay.
My understanding is, and others who know more about this than me will tell me I've got this wrong and correct it if I do get it wrong. But my understanding is there's a formula which is used by the local authority to calculate the damage cost. My understanding is that it requires an annual average daily traffic figure to be fed into the equation, the formula, and whatever else is required, you end up with a sum of money. And if you do that on the figures that we've used via Mr. Axon, then you come to that £250,000.
Okay.
Now, what we have been, just to put my cards face up on the table about this, what we are trying to work out, and I believe that we may well have emailed the council's EHO, if that hasn't happened yet, it's certainly due to happen soon, to just ask, well, what would the cost be if you use, now that we've got a traffic assessment from Mr. Stevens, which we didn't have before, I'm not making criticism, I'm stating a fact, which we didn't have until we received his proof. Now that we've got an alternative set of figures, can they be used to work out what the alternative cost would be? Now, we're having a stab at this ourselves. Mr. Stevens doesn't give an annual average daily traffic flow figure. He gives peak hour figures. There are various ways you can convert that into an annual average daily, but I don't know whether the council, via their own resources and or Mr. Stevens, would be able to just cut through all of that and come up with a figure that needs to go into the formula. Because, to be quite honest about this, we have no idea whether the £252,000 would, rise, very, very majorly, wouldn't increase that much at all. If it wouldn't increase that much at all, we may very well say, let's cut through all of this and we'll just pay the higher sum anyway, even if we're right about traffic. But if it's, I don't know, double or something, we'd almost certainly say, well, no, we're not prepared to do that. And we would have a 106 which works as the draft 106 does at the moment, where this matter is to be resolved as each reserved matter comes forward, and there's a way of applying the formula then, and you come up with a cost as you go along. You pay as you go, if you like. So we're trying to find out whether we can just cut through all of this, and at the moment we've got no idea whether we can. We're trying to do the work ourselves. I've now very openly explained the point, and so if the council is not now, but is able to assist between now and when we penciled in the air quality session next week, if we're able to get to the bottom of this, we may be able to just resolve it in one fell swoop,
Right.
or we might not. So that's where we are, sir.
Okay.
So as far as the principle is concerned, I entirely agree with Mr. Katkowski that the Statement of Common Ground on air quality, I think probably poorly expressed actually, is meant to indicate that the damage cost calculation does vary with traffic flow.
Right.
It's meant to say that. It doesn't say that very clearly. I'm not aware that we've had a request for an annual average daily traffic figure, but I'm sure if one is made, it's effectively been made now, I'm going to pass on that instruction to the county council, who will hopefully be able to help with that, and that figure, if there is a figure, can be fed into a calculation of a damage cost that the appellants can then consider, and that can feed into the further discussions on the planning obligation, and an approach can be agreed, I would hope.
Yes. So forgive me, what we've done is apparently we've emailed the EHO, Matt, so our air quality, Mr. Stoning, our expert, has emailed your EHO to ask whether he's able to provide, your EHO is able to provide a calculation.
Right.
So that's to say, can he tell us what, using Mr. Stevens' work, the figure would be?
So we will respond to that. We're obviously in the hands of the county council to a degree, because it turns on getting an AADT figure, sorry for the shorthand, from the county council. If that's forthcoming, I'm sure that Mr. Martin, the environmental health officer, will be able to undertake the calculation exercise that comes up with an alternative damage cost figure, and pass that on to the appellants, and that can then be considered and discussed as part of the ongoing 106 discussions.
Okay. And bearing in mind, I haven't seen the 106 or draft 106, and I'm not sure how all of that is phrased, but presumably it is simply that the figures will be fed in, the formula will be included within section 106.
Yes,
so
as Mr. Katkowski said, as currently drafted, I'm conscious you've not seen that, there isn't a figure given, but there is provision for a calculation at each reserve matters stage.
Okay,
That's
so you're not asking me to calculate.
No, that's what I call the pay as you go.
Yes, exactly.
So we're just trying to get to the bottom of whether we can cut through all of that and just agree a figure now, and that's that, which obviously would be the easiest way of doing things. But as I say, if as and when we get a figure back, if it's eye-watering, then we're not going to do it, and if it's within reasonable bounds, we might well say, there you go.
But in any event, whichever route is decided upon, the issue of air quality mitigation, I think, will be adequately dealt with in the planning obligation, whether it's here have a figure or here's a formula.
Absolutely.
It will be dealt with.
Right. Okay. Good. Yes. That's helped clear my mind up on that. It was that particular issue that arose from the
thank you, sir.
The statement of common ground. So thank you both for
so
for
whether
clarifying
that means you need to hear from the air quality witnesses next
Probably,
Thursday or any other time, I'm not
sure. Probably not, to
right.
be honest. Probably not.
We'll stand them down, sir. We'll see where we get to in relation to this. We'll report back to you. And if you do need any clarification from either of them or both of them, then I'm sure we can make arrangements. So,
excellent.
Shall we? Thank you.
Good.
So we'll scrap the air quality.
Right. Good.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, sir. Unless Mr. Lloyd wants to have a crack at it. So.
Another witness.
Mr. Wood.
Right. Okay. In which case, that's the shortest first week of an inquiry I've ever had, I think.
Yeah,
right. So, according to the timetable, I will do a site visit either today or tomorrow. And we are not then back until Tuesday, 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
Next week to then hear the meaty highways evidence.
Yes, I think when we come to next week, we'll be looking back to this week with fond memories, to be quite frank.
Yep.
Our short days and straightforward things to talk about.
Yes, yep. But hopefully the rest of this week will give the parties time to resolve some of these issues and so
I'm acutely aware of the fact, so that you're off on a you're unaccompanied another unaccompanied tour tomorrow. But I don't think any of us have provided any sort of itinerary. But the only extra thing is that additional bridge that I mentioned yesterday. So are you content to just do your own things?
Yeah, I'm comfortable that I'll be able to see everything I need to see.
Great.
If there's anything in particular that
Yeah.
does need to be brought to my attention at a later
Indeed.
stage of proceedings, then I'm always happy to go back and have a look at that again. Yeah.
So I suspect it might be that when we get to the end, both parties, highways witnesses, there might or might not be somewhere else that you need to. Yes, somewhere else that you need to do. So, did you mention? I believe you did say yesterday you've driven around the lanes.
Yes. Yep. I have
Would you
driven.
intend, perhaps, subject to the weather, maybe to walk them? 'Cause-
Oh, yes, I will be.
thank you.
Yes.
So that'd
Yep.
be
Mhm.
very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what is it? Let me just think. Thursday tomorrow, the farm shop would be open. As I noticed, unfortunately, it was closed when we were walking around the other day, but be open tomorrow.
Right.
So.
That's good to know. All right. Okay. Are there any other procedural matters that we need to discuss before
No,
next
sir.
week?
Nothing
No?
from me, sir. Thank you.
Okay. In which case, thank you very much. It's 11:20. We'll adjourn until 1 o'clock on Tuesday next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much indeed. Ian, do you know, can we
Oh,
leave our boxes and stuff in
Janice,
that room?
can things go into the rooms?
Great, thank you so much.